FBI and the DOJ have tracked more than 100 incidents of Chinese nationals posing as tourists in order to access U.S. military bases and other sensitive federal sites.
They're just testing us, knowing they're going to get caught, but they want to see how hard it is. I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjekovic. And we are Unapologetically Outspoken. Okay, Stephanie, I don't know if you have been watching all this nonsense going on in the news, but like one of the big topics that I've been seeing a lot this week has been centered around everything that's going on with the Chinese nationals that have been posing as tourists to access U.S. military bases. Have you seen this?
Yes. I heard about it on a podcast, but all the damn news clips I've been seeing have been Hunter Biden, Joe Biden walking off stage, like stupid things like that. And so luckily I did hear a little bit about China from a podcast. That's about it.
Well, I guess it was originally reported by the Wall Street Journal, and I couldn't read the article because I don't have a subscription, but I found several other articles that were covering it. And one of them was Business Insider, and one was also Fox News. And they were talking about this Wall Street Journal article that was exposing that the FBI and the DOJ have tracked more than 100 incidents of Chinese nationals posing as tourists in order to access U.S. military bases and other sensitive federal sites. And according to the Wall Street Journal, there's data compiled by the U.S. Department of Defense that indicate they're saying most of these incidents took place in rural areas, kind of like away from the tourist hotspots and commercial airports. But based on what I read, it seems like there's some fairly high profile locations. There was one incident where Chinese nationals were found scuba diving off Cape Canaveral in Florida, which is home to the Kennedy Space Center. There were several incidents in Florida, actually, one at an intelligence center in Key West, where apparently Chinese nationals have been repeatedly caught posing as tourists swimming near the facility and taking pictures. And I guess one of these incidents led to the arrest of 3 Chinese citizens receiving prison sentences. I mean, going back to 2020, after pleading guilty to illegally entering the Key West Naval Air Station and taking these pictures. And then reportedly there was, like, they call them, quote, gate crashing incidents where Chinese nationals were detected crossing into a U.S. missile range in New Mexico. There were other incidents where Chinese nationals would show up at a military base claiming they had reservations at a hotel on the base. The Wall Street Journal also highlighted an incident that occurred in Alaska where a group of Chinese nationals claiming to be tourists tried to push past guards at Fort Wainwright. And that's the home to the U.S. Army's 11th Airborne Division, and they focus on Arctic warfare. And then there were reportedly other incidents where Chinese nationals were pretending to be tourists and claiming shit like their Google Maps were directing them to the nearest fast food restaurant, which just happened to conveniently be next to these military bases. And the Pentagon spokesperson, Sue Gao, she told the Wall Street Journal that on some occasions, Chinese nationals gained access to the base by basically speeding through security checkpoints. And this article reported that another FBI spokesperson said, China is, quote, the greatest long-term counterintelligence threat to U.S. information and intellectual property. And then an FBI spokesperson also told Fox Digital News, quote, the Chinese government is engaged in a broad, diverse campaign of theft and malign influence without regard to the laws or international norms that the FBI will not tolerate. And I don't know about you, Stephanie, but it seems to me that we clearly are tolerating this kind of thing. If there have been over 100 reported incidents and they're going back several years, and we're basically doing nothing to protect our borders, and we allow, Chinese spy balloons to travel over our airspace for days, and our president doesn't give a shit about national security, and the White House can't be bothered to even comment on any of this. So I think we are tolerating it.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like they're just testing us, knowing they're going to get caught, but they want to see how hard it is to gain access. And Biden doesn't give a shit. He's on death's doorstep. Like, he doesn't know what the hell's going on. He's just a puppet to the globalist elites that want one world order. And the only way to do that is by taking over the US. Like, I strongly believe that's what's happening. And I mean, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Like, this is the consequence of wide open borders. Of course, there's going to be enemies pouring in and setting up shop, whether they're coming over illegally or like some of them, like you said, were posing as tourists. And I don't know why anyone in our government would be surprised by any of that. Like, China owns all this land right by our military bases, which they know about and have done nothing about. Like you said, they sent in spy balloons. They've been planning this for decades. And a while back, I came across an interview from someone that was one of the top, with the top intelligence agencies. Like, I guess he was retired, and he was just talking about China's long game and what he had seen throughout his entire career, starting back in the 50s. And he said back then they would send a ton of young Chinese men to come to America and either go to high school or college, just depending on their age. And then they would get jobs at the biggest companies as well as in the government. And knowing that it would take decades, but at some point they could use these men to call in favors. And these Chinese men are so conditioned in these communist countries to be loyal to the state and only the state. But just in case they aren't and they forget, China has insurance policies. And what they do is they keep their parents and families in China so that if these people don't work with the CCP, they'll threaten their loved ones. So if this started in the 50s, and according to that intelligence officer, imagine how many people have worked their way into high positions in the private sector and the public sector. And we already know that China has completely infiltrated the universities as well as the curriculums. And like, I mean, just look at the most recent of that university where Biden was hiding all of his confidential documents. And that university also just happened to take millions upon millions of dollars from China. Why? Because China, again, is playing the long game, knowing that they can target young adults at that vulnerable age where they're pissed at the world, at their parents, at the government. And so they can use them in these universities and shape them into little communists. And what's wild is that I didn't realize until this whole like espionage incident came out that Chinese citizens that truly are tourists, like that are just traveling for vacation, the CCP will target them and again, like threaten them and say, you're going to go here and you're going to do this. And if you don't, we're going to hurt your family. And that was what they were talking about on the podcast that I had heard. So, you know, they like, this is what happens when you have a communist party and they're in control of your entire life. This is what happens when you have a social credit score where if you don't comply, they'll empty your bank account. So I think that this whole thing is much bigger than anyone anticipated. And I think it's been going on a lot longer than we realize.
Yeah, you know what? I saw this article earlier and I was going to mention it, and this, you just kind of like set that up perfectly, because you're talking about how basically they control your whole lives, right? And China is proposing a new law right now that would ban dressing in a way that would, quote, hurt the nation's feelings. And so if this law passes, police are going to be able to detain people who wear the, quote, wrong clothes, and they'll be able to detain them for up to 15 days and then issue them a fine. And I didn't have time to like translate this into US dollars, but the fine is up to 5,025 yuan, however you say that, or like 550 euros. So whatever that is in US dollars. And it's basically suggesting, this proposal, that citizens can be punished if they produce, disseminate, publicize, or spread items or speeches that damage the Chinese nation spirit and hurt the China nation's feelings. Like, that's fucking extreme, right?
Well, yeah. And that's why all of these college students that are like progressives and are like, yeah, go communism. I really think that there should be a program where they have to go spend a summer in China and then tell me you like communism, because that's the shit that happens. They control everything.
Yeah. And like I mentioned, there has, as far as I'm aware, unless something has come out between us recording this podcast and releasing it the following day, there is no official comment from the White House on any of this. The only people that are speaking out are a few members of Congress. You have Mike Waltz from Florida. He's a member of the House Armed Services, Foreign Affairs, and Intelligence Committee, and he's blaming the Biden admin for China's blatant surveillance attempts. And he said that the Biden admin would rather, quote, set up senior level meetings with Chinese officials rather than show any strength, which is absolutely true. And there was an article in Politico this week where Congressional Rep Mike Gallagher, who chairs the House Committee on China, he warned that the United States does not fully grasp the extent of China's espionage in America, like you literally just went in detail about. And he said, we're just beginning to scratch the surface of what's happening. And he talked about the powerful influence of the Chinese Ministry of State Security and the United Workfront Department in China, both of which apparently play a very secretive role in intelligence gathering, and that these two entities are not really well understood by the West. And according to this article, the Ministry of State Security recently announced that it's going to pursue efforts to enlist its citizens in counter-espionage efforts in response to a new Chinese law that has expanded the scope of Chinese surveillance over documents and data that could allow Beijing to interfere with American businesses that operate in China. And in response to this new rule, Gallagher stated, quote, in China, there is no such thing as a private company. Everybody, everything, every entity is subject to the whims of Xi Jinping. He also stated, quote, I believe that Xi Jinping's lifelong ambition is to take Taiwan. It would make sense they would seek to gather as much information as possible in preparation for such a conflict, and also in order to weaken our ability to surge men and materials from the domestic U.S. to the Indo-Pacific if we did find ourselves in a shooting war with China, which we should be moving heaven and earth to try and avoid and deter because it would be incredibly destructive. And so what is the response from China about all this? Well, a spokesperson for the Chinese embassy recently came out and stated, quote, we urge the relevant U.S. officials to abandon the Cold War mentality, stop groundless accusations, and do more things that are conducive to enhancing mutual trust between the two countries. And here's what's scary too. The Washington Times also reported on Wednesday that China is rapidly advancing their EMP program. And we've talked about this before. But in case any of our listeners don't know what EMP is, it's electromagnetic pulse, and it's basically radiated energy pulses that can destroy or damage electronic systems over wide areas. It basically like shuts down communications and vital infrastructure, like it shut down our power grids across the country. So on Wednesday, military and intelligence analysts published a report called There's a Darkness in the Distance, the Rising Threat of China's EMP Weapons to U.S. Defenses and Critical Infrastructure. And this report that just came out 2 days ago stated, quote, China's rapid advancement in the fields of EMP weaponry has emerged as a significant concern for the strategic landscape of global security, particularly concerning the vulnerabilities of U.S. military and civilian operations. End quote. It also specified that, quote, the EMP weapon could destroy multiple systems on the Pentagon's F-35 and F-22 jets, as well as the coming B-21 strategic bombers. All these rely on MEMS, which stands for micro electromechanical systems, which are basically the tiny little microchips that power our smart devices. And said they rely on MEMS technology, including navigation systems, weapon systems, and flight safety systems. And the report also stated that Chinese EMP can attract the radar systems on our warplanes. And so that's fucking scary. And then the whole thing with like American businesses operating in China. I don't know if you saw this, Stephanie, but a couple days ago, China announced that they are now banning their government officials from using iPhones. And not only can they not use them for work, but apparently they're not even like allowed to bring iPhones into the office.
I did see that. And it's interesting because China has some really sophisticated phones as well that are banned in the US for the same reason. Like they don't want China spying or whatever. But let's be honest, like, is any private company in the US private? I mean, like just everything that was exposed with the Twitter files and how all these private social media companies were being monitored and manipulated and paid by all these government agencies. Like, I'm sure that ours aren't really private either. But, you know, I'm just thinking real quick, like about the whole EMP thing. Do you it just seems weird to me that at a time where our government is pushing so hard for everything to be electric, including our home appliances, knowing that we're at like the greatest risk of an EMP where everything that is electric wouldn't work. Like, are they doing that shit on purpose?
I would not put it past our government.
I mean, I didn't think about that till now, but it's like they're trying to move everything, like our basic appliances. So are they trying to like kill us off or what?
yeah, I think so.
Oh
I mean,
my God,
let's be real.
scary.
Like, honestly, like the whole thing with EMP is fucking frightening.
Yeah, that is what worries me the most is the whole EMP thing. I mean, like they know if we got hit with an EMP, it would absolutely cripple us because it's not like you just flip a switch back on and everything turns on. It would take months, if not longer. And I think we talked about it on that one episode we did where they said it was either 6 months or 9 months to get everything up and running. And by then they said like 90% of the population would be dead because of just, you wouldn't have anything. You wouldn't have medicine, heat, like running water, like anything. It would be a complete catastrophe. And it's like that Chinese balloon was not a fucking weather balloon. Like they were collecting intel. And I think, the fact that they went over the whole country, looked at all the military bases, that could have easily been an EMP attack, but maybe it was them planning it out. Like
because we let them, because we knew, like, seriously, our
Mhm.
administration let them do that for what,
Yeah.
a fucking week?
Yeah. And not just an EMP, but like we talked about the whole Maui thing and these direct energy weapons, like either or, like either one would be terrifying and they could easily do that. And what's really scary is there have been a ton of warnings this year about threats to our infrastructure, like just random news articles left and right about it. And I looked it up, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency announced that on October 4th, there's going to be alerts to everything. Every TV, radio, cell phone, everything is going to get an alert as a test to ensure that the country is prepared and so that the public can be informed in the event of a large scale emergency. And the New York Times reported that this is only the second time ever that this alert is going to be tested on cell phones. So many people are speculating now, like, what are they preparing for? Do they think that an attack is likely? And I mean, surely they do with everything intensifying with Russia and China. It really doesn't leave me with the warm fuzzies. And I really think that the next war that we're dealing with is going to be with technology. Like it's going to be an EMP or a DO. It's not going to be with bullets and bombs. I really don't think. And with all the shit that's happened so far this year that we've talked about numerous times on the podcast, I think it's already started. Either it's our government trying to take control from the people, or it's an attack and the government is keeping it quiet.
Yeah, and then you also have like the issue with the hundreds of secret Chinese police stations operating around the world. And we talked at length about this on a previous podcast, that many of those secret police stations are in the United States. And there was like an incident back in April in New York where 2 Chinese nationals were arrested for having one of these stations because when they were confronted by the FBI, they started destroying evidence. Like,
yeah, and that seemed crazy. Like when that first came out, I'm like, how the hell do you have Chinese police stations? But what it was they were acting almost like their little immigration offices or like embassies to help Chinese citizens that are here on like work visas and things like that. So again, like now that we have a wide open border, I'm sure that it's way worse than what's being reported. They probably have those set up all over the place to help out all these Chinese men of military age that are crossing the border every single day.
Oh, definitely. And now we already have evidence that our military is being infiltrated from the inside, because there was an article in the BBC News a few days ago and many other news outlets about how two US Navy sailors in California have been arrested on charges of providing sensitive military information to China. And there were two separate incidents that took place in two different locations. One of them, the guy's name is Jin Chao Wei, and he's a 22-year-old naturalized U.S. citizen who's been serving as a machinist mate on the USS Essex, and he has a security clearance, or had, and he had access to sensitive information about the ship, and he's being accused of conspiring to send national defense information to a Chinese agent. And according to the indictment, he was allegedly approached by a Chinese agent in February of last year, and this agent paid him thousands of dollars for pictures, videos, technical manuals, and blueprints of the ship. And according to the DOJ, he also gave the agent details of US Marines who were on a maritime training exercise. And then the other separate incident involved Petty Officer Wenheng Zhao, a 26-year-old who was arrested on charges of accepting money for something similar, sensitive photos and videos. And he worked at the naval base in Ventura County in California. And a year earlier, in 2021, he was allegedly approached by a Chinese agent posing as a researcher who wanted information to make some investment decisions. And this agent paid Zhao around $15,000 for photos, videos, diagrams, and blueprints of a radar system stationed on the US military base in Okinawa, Japan.
I hope they make an example out of those guys so no other people decide they're going to pocket some money. Like, they need to throw them in jail and lock the key, like throw out the key.
Yeah, and these are the two that they've found out about. I guarantee there's more.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and we're just gonna, like, more and more stuff is gonna come out, especially as all of these men who've illegally crossed the border start doing shit in our country. And this may not seem relevant to this whole conversation, but I honestly think it is. So as I'm scrolling through all these news articles, doing research, I came across an article in the Epic Times, and there was also an article on the Heritage Foundation website about the Foro de Sao Paulo, which is otherwise known as the Sao Paulo Forum. Have you heard of this, Stephanie?
No, never.
Okay. I hadn't either, but apparently it's the world's largest and most impactful international Marxist organization in the world. And it consists of like different governments, political parties, NGOs, third-party groups, guerrilla groups, and terrorists. And this organization was formed in 1990 by Fidel Castro, who was the longtime leader of the Communist Party in Cuba, and the current president of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, and I think they just refer to him as Lula. But our media outlets here in the United States did not cover any of this. But apparently there was a gathering a couple months ago in Sao Paulo, Brazil. It was like June 29th to July 2nd. And according to the article I read, this group is behind a lot of the drug trafficking and targeted immigration, financing of political parties here, and supporting groups like the BLM. And during this conference, Lula spoke about how he was against family tradition and patriotism, because these are all enemies of communism. And throughout the conference, there was a lot of negative, derogatory talk about the United States and a lot of praise for China, Russia, Cuba, and Venezuela. And during the opening declaration of the conference, forum members said they were planning to deepen their ties with the Chinese Communist Party. And one of the statements was, quote, the United States project of domination over Latin America and the Caribbean is facing an environment marked by threats to its hegemony. The dispute with China and the growing presence of progressive or leftist political forces in regional governments constitute an important challenge to a country affected by multiple crises that are manifesting themselves in the political, economic, and cultural spheres, referring to the United States, which is exactly what's happening here. And it also said, quote, cooperation between China and Latin America is not new and will grow in the future. And there was a link to the declaration in the article, but the whole thing was written in either Spanish or Portuguese. So I don't know exactly what it said, but that was the interpretation that was put in this article.
So not only do we have to worry about BRICS, but we have to worry about this group of like terrorists.
Yes, that has already funded all of this destruction in the United States with BLM and everything else. And my point in bringing this up is that this group is strengthening their ties with Russia and China. And in addition to the Chinese Communist Party being in attendance at this meeting, there were several members of the Democratic Socialists of America in attendance. And if you're not familiar with that party, that's the party that several members of Congress, US Congress, are involved in, including Bernie Sanders, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Jamal Bowman, and Cori Bush. So not only are we compromised from the inside by Chinese nationals, but we also have members of Congress and Americans who are very outspoken in being favor of us basically becoming Marxist or China.
Shouldn't we like remove them from Congress? I mean, to me, like that seems like a form of treason or something, or like, you know what I mean? Like they're talking to a group of terrorists.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Unfreaking believable. Well, speaking of Marxism, I came across an article from Tom Licata on ethanallen.org where he talks about the 45 goals of communism that was read into the congressional record by Congressman Albert S. Herlong Jr. of Florida in 1963. And I think I went over some of these on a previous episode, but he mentioned just a few of the 45 in this article. And I want to just read through it. Okay. So again, like this is supposed to be the 45 goals of communism. And I want you to see how familiar this sounds. Number 1, capture one or both of the political parties in the United States. Number 2, get control of the schools and teachers associations, soften the curriculum. Number 3, gain control of all student newspapers. Number 4, infiltrate the press. Number 5, gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and pictures. Number 6, eliminate all laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship and a violation of free speech and press. Number 7, break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in the media. Number 8, present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. Number 9, infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion. Number 9, eliminate prayer or any phrase of religion, or I'm sorry, I guess that would be 10. Eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in the schools on the grounds that it violates the principle of separation of church and state. Discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate and old-fashioned. Discredit the American founding fathers as selfish aristocrats and racists. Hello, what have we heard a lot? Belittle American culture and discourage the teaching of American history. Discredit and eventually dismantle the FBI. Infiltrate and gain control of big businesses and unions. Transfer some of the powers of arrest from the police to social agencies. Treat all behavioral problems as mental health or social problems. Discredit the family as an institution, encourage promiscuity and easy divorce, emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents. So basically everything that's happened since 2020, like literally one after the other, these things have been in our face since 2020. So yeah, like I would say that the Chinese long game has worked and they have successfully infiltrated and started to shift our culture. And I'd like to point out that although there's one party that is outright pushing these things, it is both parties. Like behind closed doors, they're all friends and they're all part of the same agenda, which is why nothing ever gets done or addressed. It's like the establishment uniparty. So I feel like we're at a point where we cannot look at things anymore as Democrat versus Republican. Like that's why they're constantly trying to divide us. So when you see these people that are calling everyone racist or condemning religion, it's not because they want to fight racism. It's because they're trying to divide us. They're following an agenda, a very clear agenda of how to turn a country into a communist country. And they could care less about helping trans people or people of color or women. It's about finding multiple ways to divide us and keep us busy with all of this nonsense so that they can get their agenda items checked off. So people need to quit falling for these woke tactics. Like it's crazy. how growing up and like forever the left was against the establishment, and now it's like all for it. You know, this establishment that is supposedly systemically racist is now something that's being followed like a religion. And they fell lockstep in place with COVID mandates, with hating on MAGA supporters and calling everyone racist and allowing our freedoms to be taken away, all because the establishment told them to. Like, this is communism 101. And the mainstream media, they told everyone that Trump was a mean orange man and they should hate him. And so look at how many people did, simply because they were told to. And although there are still people falling for this communist crap, if you look at the cultural revolution taking place that we've talked about on previous episodes, it's proving that people are waking up to the bullshit. Like, people, even people that hated Trump and didn't vote for him, are starting to ask questions, and they may still hate him, and that's okay. But like, I want to pose a question for everyone listening. Why do they hate him so much? Why does the establishment hate him so much? Why do career politicians and mainstream media that have screwed this country so badly hate Trump? Because he refused to go along with this communist agenda. He pushed back against the machine. He made it perfectly clear that it's Americans versus the establishment, and he supported the Americans. And I think that the reason I'm bringing all this up, like, I know it's getting a little bit off topic, but the reason I'm bringing it up is because I think he is the only shot at getting us out of this mess and keeping us from World War III, from going into communism. Like, he is the only president that did not put more troops on the ground and start more wars. There was a historical amount of world peace, a drastic reduction in conflict while he was president. And everything that they said he would do, Biden ended up doing. Biden's the one that got us into this conflict that could turn into a nuclear war, World War III. Biden's the one that raised taxes. Biden's the one that divided us. Biden got almost the entire Eastern world to join forces and create a new currency to fuck the US. So again, like, I know this episode was about China, but it all comes back to like the decision you make when you go to vote is going to directly impact whether we get into further conflict or whether we have a choice at peace and fighting back against all this stuff that's happening. And like, I firmly believe, and Tara, you can call me crazy or you can agree, I don't know, but I think there is one man in the world that can negotiate us out of this mess, and that's Trump.
Yeah, but how much longer is Biden in office?
I know.
Like, I'm sorry, but I agree with you. You know that. But the amount of damage that can be done in the next, what is it, a year? A
Well,
little more
Trump,
than a year?
yeah.
I
Trump
mean,
himself said he doesn't think we'll make it.
no,
And,
I
look at,
don't.
they're actively trying to get him off the ballot. Like, a federal judge or whoever it was, Supreme Court, whatever, said they can't do that, but they're trying. And like, for anyone that wants to come at me, by the way, like, I know I had one person like calling me a MAGA Trump supporter. I was never a MAGA Trump supporter. In fact, I wasn't planning on voting for him again. Like, we had talked about this when we first started the podcast. I was dreading the upcoming election and like the drama around Trump until Biden fucked things up so badly for our country that I then realized how good things were as a nation because of the policies Trump put into place. Like, forget about him and just look at the policies and look at how life was before Biden got in office. It is drastically different, and it keeps getting worse every day. And like they always say, you don't realize how good you had it until it's gone. And we're about to lose everything if we don't course correct immediately. So I think it's time for everyone to wake the fuck up and start speaking up. There's no more silent majority bullshit. There's no more Democrat versus Republican. It's speaking up and fighting for America, for our freedoms, for our future. And like, they can ignore a few of us, but they can't ignore all of us. But is everyone going to just sit back and let it happen? I don't know, maybe.
And you know what else, even though like we're primarily talking about China, like keeping up with what's happening in Russia at the same time. I think it was just 2 days ago that it was on a Russian state television that they are threatening nuclear strikes against the United States because of our involvement in the whole, war in Ukraine. And I think specifically one of the things that was said was the most important message we should send to Americans as is that we will not wage a war with you in Europe. In response to your attacks on Russian military or civilian facilities, the first strike will be a preventative limited strike against targets on the territory of the United States of America. So there's that too. And yet we're going to keep sending aid and weapons, nuclear weapons and everything else to the Ukraine because that's what Biden does on a fucking weekly basis. And so between what's happening with the shit that's going on in our country, the threats from China, the threats from Russia, the economic threats with BRICS, like, I don't know that we're going to last a year to the election. Like, that sounds very bleak, but honestly, there's so much shit going on that I don't think we could just keep holding out for Trump or whomever.
Well, and knowing that, you still have people like Nikki Haley saying like, absolutely, we should send more resources to Ukraine. It's like this whole uniparty, both Republican and Democratic. It's like the industrial military complex or military industrial complex, whatever they call it. They're all making money off of this.
Right.
Okay. Like they could give two shits about you or I. They all have their bunkers underground.
Yeah.
So they're going to do whatever they can to line their pockets. And yeah, it's really scary. And yet there's still people out there that like don't get it and have their head in the sand and think that our biggest problem is like trans rights and, shit that we shouldn't be worried about right now because we're about to lose everything if we don't get our head in the game and like figure this thing out. And obviously Biden's not going to do it. Kamala sure as hell isn't going to do it.
But she's ready. She's ready to accept the role of presidency. That's what she said earlier this week.
Oh my gosh. She's been waiting for that moment since she said yes to Biden. We did it, Joe. And like every day she's hoping he's going to fall down those stairs one more time.
Coming. I'm telling you, it's coming.
All right. Well, we stuck with our tradition of making you fear that there's an apocalypse on Friday. It's like our Friday thing, like doomsday. But in all reality, like everyone should know what's going on and be informed so that you can make smart decisions and quit falling for this nonsense that they're promoting on the mainstream news. So, yeah, everyone have a great weekend now. Enjoy your freedom. And we'll be back here hopefully with some better news on Monday. Thanks for tuning in. If you're sick of all the crazy shit going on in our country and you want to express your support and patriotism for the show, head on over to our Etsy store at UO Patriot Chicks and check out our new stickers. The link can also be found on our website. If you love the show and you want exclusive episodes, support the podcast and join the conversation by becoming a member of our Patreon community. We'll be posting weekly member-only podcast episodes and content that isn't available on the weekly podcast. Every Patreon member will also get a free Unapologetically Outspoken sticker and updates about our new sticker release before they're made public. And be sure to follow us on TikTok at Unapologetically Outspoken. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast. The more you support us, the more people we can reach. So help us spread the word.